Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to AI Security as a Strategic Advantage. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit improving access and knowledge in entrepreneurship to advance economic progress for all. And so, as you will see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to help entrepreneurs fuel prosperity no matter where their journey begins. So, definitely be sure to check out those links and resources shared in the chat. And now we are going to launch a few polls to step back, take a temperature gauge on how everyone is feeling today. And we use this information to guide the programs that we provide for this global community of entrepreneurs. So if there are any specific topics or challenges you'd like us to create resources for, feel free to share those in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from by dropping it in the chat. We'd love to see where everyone's joining us for our time together today. And second, we are going to host live Q&A at the event, so please submit your questions at any time using that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to as many as we can. Now, while you are answering these polls, I'd like to just take a moment to recognize the incredible support of our corporate partners. The work that we do at the center would not be possible without the generosity and belief of our partners and funders, including Nasdaq, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asia Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the Narit Foundation, and BPM. We are deeply grateful for their partnership, and we hope you'll join us in sharing that appreciation. All right, we got one more poll going here. Awesome. I see we got folks from Maryland, Wisconsin, Oregon, California. Welcome, welcome. So great to have folks from all over the place joining today. Awesome. Well, without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our two special guests, Katie Boswell, leader in the KPMG advisory practice and trusted cybersecurity advisor, and Kristy Hornland, director of trusted AI and lead securing AI director at KPMG in the US. Katie, Kristy, so amazing to have you both on for this important topic today. And I am going to pass it right over to you.
Hey, Michelle, I know I speak for both Kristy and I when I say that we are very excited to be here today. I know KPMG is really proud of our sponsorship and all the great things that you and the Entrepreneurial Center do. And I think, more than anything, we're very excited to hear, how everybody's doing as it relates to this topic. And, our goal today is to share some insights that we hope will resonate and hopefully it'll make everybody's path, a positive one. So maybe I'll start by introducing myself and then I'll hand it over to Kristy. My name is Katie Boswell. I'm a managing director in KPMG's cybersecurity and tech risk practice. I have over 20 years of experience in the industry. The last almost 11 of them have been with KPMG, where I've been working in our cyber practice. I've done everything from identity and access management to mergers and acquisitions, cybersecurity due diligence. And the focus of my day-to-day now is in leading our securing AI services, which is all about helping our clients establish and maintain trust in their AI systems and giving a lot of thought to what that looks like from a cybersecurity perspective.
And so to add to that, obviously, my name is Kristy Hornland. I support Katie on a huge amount of our security initiatives here around our AI deployments, both for KPMG as client zero, with our partners as well as with our clients today. So excited to have this conversation. I've been with KPMG for 11 years, and I'm also the lead for the Global Resilience Federation's AI Security Working Group, where we partner with public and private. We partner with universities that are actually conducting research about these areas, and then with these organizations, some of the largest life sciences, financial services firms, essentially highly regulated bodies, as well as those that are actually startups themselves. So my background also includes being part of an incubation team for a AI security startup that spun out of KPMG. So hopefully the lens today that Katie and I will share will be from the perspective of giving insight not only on what these larger organizations are seeing in terms of transformation around AI governance management and security, but also what we think may come down as questions to your own organizations as you are going through and interacting in essentially building your market space as well. So I think with that, Katie, I'll pass back to you and we can start to get into the meat here.
Yeah, I think as Kristy and I have been going through this journey, as she mentioned, we had the benefit to be involved in thinking about the challenges around AI before the buzz of Gen AI, before it started to be a topic that was just on everybody's mind and was being asked about at a board level. And these risks that you'll see here that we've outlined, these are really going to be multifaceted, and we're going to talk about how they're going to play into the things that you as entrepreneurs need to be thinking about. It's important here to understand that regarding AI, there are both internal and external risks that need to be considered. Some of them are probably ones that you're very familiar with and hear about a lot, like talent implications. But when you actually dive in to think about it, there might be a couple of different ways to look at these things. So for instance, talent implications might, yes, mean that organizations can do more with less. And maybe that means that they don't need to have as many people on their payroll. Probably a good thing for this group of people that you can do more leveraging AI, but also means you need to give thought to how you're cultivating your talent and building up their skills. And so there are concerns like that. And then there are ones that you're already probably thinking about, right? What does this mean for your IP? What do you need to be thinking about from a copyright perspective? And so we're going to be diving into a number of these throughout our conversation, but they're all really underlined by financial, brand, and reputational risk at a minimum. Maybe there's some more risk in there for you depending on your business. So welcome your thoughts on that. Kristy, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think maybe to also give, if folks are less familiar with specific types of adversarial attacks over AI that we've really seen over both exploration from an academic side and then also on events that Katie and I have been involved with in terms of responding to particular incidents, we do see a emergence of something really data poisoning as a potential attack field versus having a traditional software deployment where things kind of sit at a point in time. We have to think of models as shifting outputs over time. We talk about that in terms of drift, but there are specific instances where there may be an adversarial attack where particular data sets that are training the systems that we're using to essentially come with a different outcome than what we had initially established as the prioritized use case. Those particular things can have long-term impacts on financials or reputation of the business. So it's important for us to think about these risks and essentially model them beforehand to put controls in place to mitigate, as well as when we're thinking about things like the existence of a risk of model theft. I know Katie hit on the idea of the IP really being critical in this, but we have to think about, we have specific parts of our organization that are probably the most aware of how we've trained a model to essentially come to the use case that we've identified, the outcome that we're looking for, that knowledge itself. If somebody is to either gain insight into how a model was trained, the types of underlying data sets, then go to a competitor and share that type of information, essentially it would be theft of a lot of what had gone into constructing your own IP. We have to think about this as a crown jewel for an organization. And especially for those that have embedded AI in their services or the product that they offer to today, recognizing that one, you kind of need to think about protections for yourself, but as we think about what organizations may offer you questions about, how are you securing the product or service that you're offering them today, especially working with larger organizations, this is some of the context that they have in their minds in terms of what their security teams are actually going to ask about, and why they're asking those questions is really to make sure if you have a crown jewel that's part of this process, that we're recognizing it has a lot of these particular risk areas that need to be controlled and mitigated and monitored as we go along. Anything else you'd add there, Katie, before?
No, I think it's good. Maybe would like to level set though on making sure that some of the terms that we're using are ones that are familiar, like models and training, for example. So I'm really curious, Kristy, you suggested this earlier, but maybe we can use a show of hands for, how many people are, hopefully, can we see that, by the way? I'm looking now. Maybe we can use a show of hands for those people who are familiar with terms like model and training, and some of what I would say are like the foundations of how AI is working. Just help us level set on how much detail we go into. Okay, so it looks like we have we have some people, probably a handful of people who, are pretty familiar with the terms that we're using. So we'll make sure to kind of adjust as we go. Thank you guys for doing that, by the way. It's really helpful. And so I'm going to use a moment here to just sort of like level set on the conversation that we're going to have today, because AI, as it relates to cybersecurity, there's a bunch of different considerations, right? So we are going to be focusing in on how we are helping people use security, right, to establish and maintain trust in their AI systems, right? What are the things that you need to do to actually make sure that your AI is secure? And as Kristy pointed out, where that might look a little bit different for some of you guys is giving consideration to what might organizations that you want to work with be asking about AI that you might be using within your own products. And then there's the overall like cybersecurity of AI, right? Making sure that you understand the robustness and vulnerabilities of AI models. There is AI-enabled cybersecurity, so how you might use AI tools to bring more cybersecurity into your organization to protect your organization overall. There's adversarial AI, right? That's what Kristy was making reference to, right? So bad actors or hackers that want to exploit vulnerabilities of AI systems in order to alter their behavior, right? So it serves as a tool for them in a way that is probably not good for you or your organization. And then there's the malicious use of AI. So this is things like, how are bad actors using AI to do something like make a phishing email, right, not look like a phishing email, right? We used to be able to tell by looking at the spelling of an email that it was a phishing email. That's just one example. There are a number of them, but we're really going to focus in on the top left here, right, which is how are we making sure that our AI is secure?
I just want to acknowledge, I appreciate in the chat, we've got kind of a range. I think somebody said in there, hey, I'm familiar with business continuity. Some are less familiar with these terms. I think the thing that I would essentially bring forward to like Katie's definitions as well is essentially like Katie and I share a role in terms of creating justified trust in these systems. What that really means is that we have this idea of people inherently trust a system, so they believe that an AI system is going to give them the result that they desire. And then there's the other part, which is the like, hey, the actual justified piece of it, which is if we were to audit or do a step through, we would actually have a record that allowed us to validate the outcomes that came from the AI system. And so justified trust essentially allows you not to have like misplaced trust in a system, and allows you to not miss out on opportunities because you don't think that you can actually validate some of the outcomes. And that's where we get into essentially an idea of kind of what strategically aligns the work that Katie and I do, but also as we step into kind of these broader principles, that's where I think you could probably relate to almost like the values and principles that you use to construct any part of your business today to really essentially build trust and reputation. But yeah.
And maybe I'll just say, I know there was some in the chat about people, not having any familiarity with the terms. We totally understand that. We want to make sure that this is a good use of time for all. So we'll try to talk probably somewhere in the middle. Those who want to kind of get into the details can reach that maybe we don't get into can reach out to us. And by all means, I think if you have a question about what a term is, feel free to ask it in the chat. Maybe someone can answer it while we're chatting. And if not, we will do our best to monitor the chat to make sure that we hit on all the points.
So maybe, Katie, we can step into kind of that Trust AI framework. Into that, I think you can probably share with them how we came to this framework today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was mentioning before, we had the benefit of being a little bit ahead of the curve and thinking about AI. AI is something that we've helped our clients with for many years, especially large enterprises, who had the ability to invest in the data scientists and the talent that enabled them to create AI. As we got closer, as we got closer to sort of like the AI boom that we saw, a lot of these topics kept coming up more frequently. And so we at KPMG needed to enable our own business by adopting AI. And so we started to give thought to, well, how do we do this in a way that we can really trust that the AI that we're using is trustworthy, right? How do we have justified trust in those AI systems, as Kristy mentioned? And so we started to look across the frameworks and the materials that were available and really started to look at how did that align to our business and our use of AI, and started to look at what were the things that were going to be important. And so KPMG created a trusted AI framework, and it looks very similar to many, but also has some differences from some. There are a number of other frameworks that are available. And these frameworks really make sure that as we're looking to bring AI into our businesses, that we're doing it in a way that's very consistent, right? So meaning as you look across these 10 different domains, as we think about things like privacy and security and fairness, by leveraging a framework, we're able to do it in a way that's consistent. Sustainability is one that is not included in all frameworks, but was really important to us. We go out and say very publicly that sustainability is important to us. We give thought to how many times we put Kristy and I on airplanes, for example, and that we're doing that in a smart way. And so we wanted to make sure that sustainability was something that we integrated. It's important to our business. And so I would also suggest to all of you that you take a moment to look across these domains and give thought to, as you are bringing AI into your business to support you, and also as you're creating solutions that may bring AI to your customers, are you taking these things into consideration? And that's what we're going to dive into a little bit deeper today, obviously with a focus around security.
Yeah.
Kristy, anything you want to add?
I was curious too. I know if folks want to raise a hand, if you've received any questions from a third party that you're working with about how you're governing the use of AI. Has anyone in this audience experienced that so far?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know, and maybe some people can kind of drop into the chat how, if they're using AI in the products that they're creating and bringing to market. Because Kristy, I think that's where your question really comes into play, right? As you're trying to bring these solutions to third parties, they're being really careful about where they bring AI in, because they want to make sure that they know how to answer how their vendors are thinking about these items that are on the screen right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know too, so this may not be a question that you've received yet. One, I think, Patty, I appreciate that comment in the chat, a question from the board of directors. So that is where we're starting to see is from your board, from customers. Also, just if you do receive third-party questionnaires, most of our clients have moved towards in the last year incorporating one declaration of if you're using AI in your solution or product. So they might just have that first gate today. And then they share additional questions with you in terms of how do we get some level of transparency over the way that you are essentially addressing these principles of responsible AI governance. A lot of times they'll be more aligned with the NIST AI risk management framework, which is publicly available for everybody to take a look at. But essentially what Katie and I would both say from our side is it's important to kind of get at least an initial understanding of how are people actually responding to these ideas of principles and governance today, especially kind of preempting the question and being prepared to have that conversation in a way that's in alignment with industry kind of leading practice. So that was just the additional context I wanted to add. And also amazing if you are the one actually bringing up. I think that also demonstrates confidence in, hey, we're thinking about these things, because a huge area of risk for organizations really comes down to the supply chain. So what they're receiving that they may not have full visibility over. And let's see here. Okay. I think too, in terms of sharing trade secrets. So we'll go into kind of what gets captured standardly here, but you'll understand it's not as much as sharing everything under the hood, but providing at least some level of how are we really managing the process around this and what are we aligning to as we move along. Because at the end of the day, the person that they'll hold accountable is those that actually brought the use case forward and developed it, core to product and business. So maybe, Katie, you want to kind of give an overarching lens on the approach to securing AI today.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important that you have a strategy about how you're going to secure your use of AI. And so the strategy here is represented in the center. I'm going to talk a little bit about what goes into a successful AI security strategy, and I'm going to talk about how that input enables your AI security strategy. So talking first on the left-hand side of the screen here, it's really important to understand that the different uses that you have of AI are going to bring about different types of risk. And so having an understanding of those types of the types of risk that you're going to be facing and what those indicators are is going to be very important, right? What are the incidents or vulnerabilities that could come about as because of the type of use of your AI? So just a quick example, right? If you're going to be using AI for an AI-enabled chatbot, right, a risk that you have is that someone might put in a question about your product and it might return an answer that's not accurate, right? So we'll talk a little bit about maybe continuing to use that example through here. We'll talk a little bit about how you could apply this from an enablement perspective. You also have to have an understanding of your ecosystem. There are different types of models, for example, or you might be working with third parties that are using different types and elements of their systems that you need to have visibility into. For instance, if you're using a model that may be potentially owned, operated, or influenced by a nation state, for example, that might not be something that you want to include, right, in your own solutions because that might be problematic in and of itself. Well, if you don't have an understanding of the underlying pieces and parts that go into AI, then you don't have a clear picture of what that is. Also, there may be regulatory considerations. Is your solution or your product or services going to be something that is going to be, let's say, giving advice? Maybe the chatbot gives advice around healthcare, for example, right? That would be something that you would need to consider from a regulatory perspective. Also, from a regulation standpoint, you need to take into consideration where you're going to be operating, right? Are your users going to be primarily in the United States? Do you have people who are going to be in the EU who are going to be accessing your system? That will drive your regulatory considerations. And then the last one here, I think all of you guys will appreciate because we're really doing it right now, is participating in public-private sector initiatives. Where can you be partnering with similar organizations who are going to help you get clarification as to the things you need to be thinking about, because many others are facing these same types of challenges. And there is a lot of good information out there and people like us, right, who are happy to come and share some of what we're learning in the space. Once you have a picture of all of those different pieces and parts of your business and how it's going to play into your AI strategy, then you can enable your business, right? So the first one is awareness. whether this is making sure that your end users are getting, your employees, for example, are getting an understanding of what AI means, right, and the risks that it brings. I always sort of equate this to like we all had to learn not to stick the USB drive that we picked up off the street into our computer because that brings risk. We all need to understand some of the nuances and the foundations around AI. Also, if you do employ security professionals or you are one, you need to make sure that you yourself are aware or those professionals are aware of how they need to be upskilling to understand the unique risks here. I talked about a framework before and how you need frameworks to help standardize and make sure you're taking a consistent approach to things like security. And so a security framework is very important to making sure that you have a cohesive or robust AI security strategy. Secure AI pipeline management. This is a fancy way of saying you need to make sure that you have a clear picture on where your AI is, right? How you're going to be securing it. What are the unique controls that you need to put into place? And then under secure AI uplift, you need to give consideration to things like, well, what happens if the AI is unavailable? What happens if there's a problem with AI? How are you going to quantify the problem, figure out what your approach is to remediate it? Sometimes we talk about things like AI red teaming or AI system testing, making sure that you have a clear picture on that. So I'll pause there, Kristy, to see if I covered everything, and hopefully I'm doing so in a way that is that everybody's able to follow.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would summarize as. And then I would also say, we got a question in the chat, and I think we can high level touch on this, obviously within time constraints here. But we got when you're responding to an AI incident, how do you handle black box AI models? One, especially like from the AI incident level, when we're looking at this, incidents have a formal definition within security and vulnerabilities as well that kind of like get a little bit spread. We may have security incidents, we may have safety incidents. There are kind of different levels of AI incidents that we look into here. But from a security perspective, one, what's really helpful is if we have gone through the process from start to finish of documenting at the beginning, this is the use case and the context it was approved for. This is the audience and appropriate identities that can interact with things like the data that's informing the model weights, all these particular areas that are really traditional access controls. It gets a little bit more dynamic with the use of agents, but looking at this really from the perspective of by up front documenting what is appropriate behavior and by restraining or constricting these particular environments, that's where we gain some of that visibility and start to document explainability and transparency aspects. And then our ongoing monitoring is where we start to look for things like toxicity. We're looking for things like having the outputs drift from really what we were intending to see. And that's when we have to start working as any other incident response exercise to look from a forensic lens at when was this behavior started? What are we looking at in terms of logging and monitoring? Who had access to the data that was informing this model? That's where it starts to become way more of a forensics conversation. But by having some of those things documented, we're not reaching into the abyss in terms of trying to understand what was this used for. Use cases aren't being deployed without an intention set at first. One, because it helps us convey what's the return on investment in this. But two, also from an auditability perspective, that's where we can say black box, but there are things that we are contributing in terms of context that we need to take accountability for. Anything you'd add there, Katie, or let me know if that was.
No, I think that was good.
And then in terms of interest, in terms of network level or device level, in security, we're looking across, you have to look across the entire ecosystem for AI. So you have to look at compute, you have to look at the perspectives of actually training the model. You have to look from the perspective of some of the even like GRC components that are more about what's the process that we've got behind this, governing our use case from start to finish and how we're integrated with pipelines. So it's the idea of being only at network or device level, really here, you have to be across the entire ecosystem to take a security perspective. But maybe kind of with that, Katie, I'm thinking that we kind of go into process to give some examples of what a kind of more mature intake through deployment journey looks like for security, unless there's anything else that not here. And I saw one comment there of GRC. GRC stands for governance, risk, and control. It really is the process of governing a use case. It's essentially a broader capability of organizations to address risks.
Yeah, and that's essentially what this process is enabling right here that we're going to walk through. So maybe I'll just give high level on the journey, Kristy, and then you can start to take us through. Essentially, as we're thinking about bringing AI into our organizations, we need to make sure that we have done some of these key steps to ensure the trustworthiness of those systems, right? That we should be able to trust those systems with our data in the hands of our end users and ultimately to achieve our business goals. Other things that are really important to the journey is one, making sure that the AI is going to bring value to your organization, right? AI is oftentimes expensive, has licensing considerations. And as we go through this process, Kristy's going to talk a little bit about the risk that we get to understand by going through a process like this. And maybe not all of this journey will apply to you and your organizations, but our hope is that by talking through it, you'll start to hear some of the things that you need to be thinking about, even if you're not at a point in time where you're looking to establish such a formalized path for bringing AI into your organization. But we'll kind of dive into some of that. So Kristy, I'm going to give it to you, and then maybe I'll just sort of like chime in as we walk through the journey with any sort of like useful clarifications.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think probably like a huge part of this is essentially first step. I think that especially understanding as organizations that are, say, developing so rapidly today, this is essentially what I would think of in your world as kind of like what's our initial use case? What's our initial idea? For other organizations, it may come more as a request to an AI center of excellence. So as you're working with other major organizations, understand that this process to them may be going through a governing body, which is why some of the key details that we've covered here are more on the lens of trying to evaluate risk up front. But something that could actually work for your organization may just be, hey, we're trying to capture general details about our use case. We're trying to capture high level potential return on investment or implementation details. High level, the types of data that we think we're going to use to train these particular models or one model. It essentially sets the idea of this is my initial, say, proposal of a use case. It's not necessarily that it'll be 100% yes or no, but it helps us gain visibility just off the bat before we've invested too much time in whether or not this is within the appetite of our organization, whether or not it's in alignment with our strategic direction, and whether or not really from the get-go, if we can kind of start to recognize, hey, there might be some security challenges with this particular use case that are unique or nuanced that might need more time down the road. This, for instance, when we think about things like, say, traditional AI use cases, the identity roles that I mentioned before are the same. They're about people accessing data and the model environment, and then accessing outputs. When we start to get into things like agentic AI, you now have something where an agent itself is not a human and therefore doesn't have a human identity the same. So if I get that early on in my use case form, my team would probably take the perspective of, hey, just a heads up coming down the pipe, we might need to spend more time considering the potential security risks that are new to our industry with this and how we're going to come about with some solutions to make sure that our use case operates effectively. This is really from the standpoint of for organizations, also trying to establish patterns that they see being effective. So as your use cases start to go through, we can start to standardize, hey, this looks similar to another use case that we've deployed. Can we also apply similar security controls? So it becomes helpful over time to continue to gather this data in a consistent format. Anything you'd add there, Katie, just high level?
No, I think you covered it. I think the intake process, whether it's something that you're going through yourselves or whether this is helpful to give you insight into what other organizations, organizations might be questioning about AI that your solutions might be providing is really important.
Mhm. Yeah, so you may actually be on the other side involved in more this third party piece that we've highlighted here. You may be the third party that they're bringing forward and I'll step into the next step here, to essentially a steerco. Your organization may have a more agile version of this, but essentially think of it in terms of with those risks that have emerged, we're essentially consulting a cross functional group, especially with emerging regulations with particular risks across different areas here. That could involve anybody from your architecture team, your security team, your third party team, legal. Really thinking about this in terms of their objective is to have a subject matter expert in that area present to help evaluate, are there potential risks that are presented across the responsible AI commitments that we've made, in which we would either need to take accountability or help address with controls. So you'll see here we have some examples of those particular principles of responsible AI. These are taken from the perspective of the NIST AI RMF, so you don't see sustainability in there. But just thinking about it in terms of, is there a cross-functional team that is looking across these areas and establishing some level of accountability? Some things are pretty straightforward, like your privacy leadership would be reviewing the privacy principle of responsible AI as they looked at the initial use case. And then as they look into some of these other areas, maybe there's a little bit of cross-functional needs. So we've got our architecture team talking with our security team about security and resilience. How are we thinking about the continuity? Exposure risk, like having a denial of service attack where suddenly the service that we require a actual call out to say open AI, if that goes down, have we planned for this use case to still function? Questions like that get brought up in these steerco conversations and are really an effective way for us to examine security risk and the other related responsible AI principles that our organization is trying to convey. This is probably where you could set a similar type model within your organization, fit with leaders that you think represent your AI principles, that you would be able to convey. Say there was a third party assessment that was asking you about, what practices do you take today to evaluate the governance of your AI use cases? This is where you could start to say, these are the people that we have represented that are subject matter experts. These are the principles that they relate to. And we host this conversation to really evaluate together an agreement on our risk appetite and alignment with strategy for our organization. And Katie, anything you'd add here before?
No, I think you covered it.
Then to kind of like step a level deeper, so we start to try to standardize the risk assessment. So we have that representation to initially say, go, no go on this use case. If we've established that there's enough value out of the use case, it's answering a unique need, and we think it's going to align with our AI strategy or innovation strategy as an organization, then what you'll see kind of on that breakdown here is we're identifying these high level risks that align to a specific control. So when we actually talk about methodology around prescribing controls or procedures that we're going to take to actually meet those high level principles, we are actually putting into play controls that are directly accountable and actually can be traced or audited for us, showing, hey, we've done the right steps here. And we've also provided accountability to the right senior leadership and their team for actually taking those controls into practice. When we look at this from our perspective, an example of this would be, hey, we are lacking visibility into the black box of AI. One of the things that could be prescribed here is from the perspective of once we've approved a use case, we're starting to document things like what is the model that we're using, what's the data source, who are the intended users of this, identifying things like, hey, what from our side, what changes have been made? Have we ever looked to update the training data? So keeping kind of like almost like a recipe card. So you're thinking about all the ingredients that make up your AI system by documenting this, and you can use tools in a long-term perspective, but really from just getting out the gate here, documenting the pieces that make up your AI system allow you to address some of the black box questions around how is this model trained, who had access, all of those things. And we would think of that control being able to show how did we address some of the principles that we were explicitly trying to meet here. And in the event of a security incident would allow us to, as I said earlier, really do some of the background forensic work to understand, hey, this is what this was identified as used for. Here are times when it was updated. These are the data sets that was approved to use. All of those things, really in a risk say led governance effort.
Maybe I'll just add that risk assessment in general is not trying to get to like a yes or no answer, but it's trying to bring visibility into, risk associated with that AI. So you can make sure that you either accept the risk and say, you know what, it's worth it to we know that there's a potential risk here, but it's worth it to our organization. Or we know that there's risk here, we're acknowledging it, and we have some things that we can do and put into place, controls that enable us to move forward with this in a confident way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's, quite a few security risks that come up. I think, Emily, you just kind of called out what's a backup plan if something becomes unavailable. And with something like the AI landscape that is evolving so quickly, like any company leveraging a third party should really have a process in place to manage those ongoing updates and changes. That's 100% right. So what we're starting to see is I've just shared on screen really like implementation of security controls that are being prescribed in areas that we're trying to enable with tooling, because as you can imagine, the larger of an organization that you're working with, and with the reality being that most third parties have enabled some sort of AI service in the last year or so, that from our perspective, that visibility piece is huge, because we really have to understand the question of where is it at today. A lot of organizations would struggle with because they didn't have a consistent process initially for inventory or intake. So first question is, hey, would we even be able to discover where we have AI today to track? And then if we have an event in which service is, say, down, do we have another path of action? Either it's a manual process, or we've actually decided to then move to a separate model, and this is the amount of time frame it'll take us to get back up and running. Those are all critical things to address in terms of continuity and disaster recovery efforts, especially even just thinking about what if there's say a potential impact where we know that there is a known vulnerability. So it's not offline, but we are now having to reposition as a different service that we're using. Those types of things should be looked at as a way for us to uplift our business continuity and disaster recovery resilience planning. But all of this is really to say, in terms of security, what we're trying to get to is, we're considering things like how are we protecting sensitive data. So when we talk about things like data loss prevention, we've had many conversations about concern not only of personal data being entered into some of these solutions and the difficulty of then, especially if it's added to training data, having a model remove that from their knowledge base. That is one of the areas that was brought up, as well as people's concerns with potentially leveraging confidential, say, proprietary information. So things about, say, specific IP to your organization being leveraged by a model. Do you have knowledge that this model is leveraging it? And how are those outputs being used? We have monitoring considerations around prompt injection, which some examples of this essentially include people essentially running through beyond just the slightly malicious use cases where they're getting instructions for malicious activities, but also including things like a webhook that actually then would send the information that you were sending via your prompt out to an external adversary. Those are things that we actually saw. So looking in terms of, do we have monitoring and protections over this? Have we also built the security awareness and education, not just of the general employee population, but also our security practitioners up to date on things like the OWASP Top 10, which looks at the top 10 vulnerabilities across Gen AI, LLMs, and machine learning. They also have some of their initial thought leadership out around autonomous, or not autonomous, but agentic AI systems. And then things like misinformation prevention. How are we looking at malicious code? So doing actual, say, scanning of the actual model itself. How are we gaining visibility? So using Discover capabilities to identify, hey, what are the services that we're using? What AI solutions are within our enterprise? And what have we also been leveraging from a third-party side? That bill of materials piece of the ingredients behind the scene is another huge thing. The third-party attestation, do we have a way for us to evaluate via a third party how secure our use cases are? Red teaming capabilities. So once you've actually gotten a use case trained, have we gone through the steps of doing a red teaming scenario where we are actually testing if adversarial, say, attempts at the system are taken? What are the responses back? Is it either to, say, not respond? Does it still respond and we need to do some work rectifying? Those types of capabilities are also either done manually or managed within a platform. And then looking for things like, how are we reporting on the state or posture of our security position? How are we monitoring for adversarial AI activity? And then anything around kind of how are we using privacy enhancing technologies or maybe synthetic data to inform our models so that we are not informing directly with data that would be considered deeply secure or say confidential in nature. We've also seen some of these things change over time, where even some of our security perspectives, like security controls around first generation RAG setups, have now moved in favor of agent-based architectures rather than offloading data to a vector database. So there are a few things that we've seen kind of evolve over time. So as we look at this map, I encourage everyone to think of this as an initial kind of taste, but also acknowledging that there's so much going on in this environment that we really have to be kind of paying attention to what's emerging, following some of the leaders in the space, leading regulation, as well as kind of, we mentioned our public-private kind of collaborators. Like that is also very important for us today. And then Katie, anything you'd add before we kind of talk about the last step here?
No, I think that was great, really thorough.
So finally, again, this is all kind of like within the scope. So when we think about it, how are you going to actually communicate the effectiveness of your program? That could be everything from establishing key performance indicators of your security team, risk indicators that come from known particular risk categories that we were sharing earlier, how we're tracking things like model drift, compliance with applicable frameworks, that broader idea of control operating effectiveness. So is somebody going through and evaluating that the controls that we prescribe for these use cases have actually been deployed appropriately, looking at access management reports over the data and models, as well as the outcomes from the system. And then looking into things like how are we enabling logging and monitoring. Some of those answers may actually be a little bit more nuanced based on the type of use case that you're deploying. But the whole thing here is really as we look at a program that we set up, we really need to look from the perspective of how are we going to share the success of this program as well as some of the challenges with our senior stakeholder group at a level that's appropriate, as well as enable our program in day-to-day activities by saying this is what is actually happening for us. These are areas we need to prioritize as bigger risks for us or that we may not have as many controls over. Those are all areas where it allows us to essentially establish our North Star as we continue the success of the program. I think all of that really is to say, like, I don't expect every organization to have 1 million people dedicated to solely the governance portion here that we've outlined. This whole process is more to give you an idea of what organizations are going through right now, considering how secure AI feeds into this broader justified trust of AI systems. And then probably one of the things that comes up, especially for all of you that are innovators, is hey, this kind of seems like something that would be a great use case for how we leverage AI to secure AI. I think that's a huge kind of common thread that we've heard through conversations is this is one of those areas that would really benefit from some of the capabilities that we're also evaluating in this time. But I think that's really from my side and my summary wrap. But Katie, I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, Kristy, I think we covered a lot of ground here today. Hopefully it was, helpful for everybody to kind of get this view of what organizations seem to be thinking about when it comes to AI, why the security of AI matters to both your organizations and those who are going to be working with products of yours. I think there's a lot of risk out there, but still the upside in leveraging AI is huge. It has so many implications that we're seeing day to day that make it worth really digging in and understanding the risks. I think it can be really easy to say to ourselves, well, that third party is one that I use for these other things. Therefore, it's one that I trust. And I think the notion that Kristy introduced early around justified trust is really important. I think some of us also work with these big organizations where we know that, one particular, software or service provider is one that we really have to go with because they offer what we're looking for. We should never take that for granted. We should always make sure that we understand what are the inner workings, what are their contractual obligations to us and us to them. Make sure that we have that clear picture so we can really take a risk-based approach to understanding if AI is the right solution for us and what are the things we need to do to make sure that we understand those risks and are, doing the best that we can to make sure we minimize those. So I hope it was a good use of everybody's time today. And I certainly enjoyed being here.
Yeah. And I think we got one question from Dave in terms of how do we put these steps into practice with the majority of AI tools such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude? This is a really great question because it comes down to the fact that, hey, I'm reliant on a service. I'm essentially assuming here, Dave, that you're using a service from, say, ChatGPT. That's something where you have to include kind of a shared responsibility view of this where you're defining the use case for your organization. So that intake still needs to happen, but evaluate some of the things in terms of, hey, do we have a plan in terms of how we're evaluating who has access to this solution? Are we comfortable with the types of data that we're going to share with this particular service embedded? Those are really questions that should be asked. I know we don't have enough time to go through and actually sketch out this full flow, but understanding that you do not essentially offboard the entire accountability of that to a third party is a really important thing to understand. There are certain controls that they may have over their particular, say, model weights that you won't get visibility into. However, that does not mean that you are not defining the context in terms of how are we going to use this as an organization, who's going to get access, what is the approved kind of initial pilot of this, where we'll also do some of the initial threat modeling over, as well as you cannot discount the involvement of legal. A lot of us spend a fair amount of time with legal in terms of discussing what's our actual agreement here with the vendor. So and that
Amazing. And I think we have time for one more question. And I just wanted to ask, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience that, are just kind of starting out with their business. And that you went over so many amazing strategies and tools, and such a great overview of like risk assessment. For somebody who's like just getting started and is still kind of like familiarizing themselves with all of this knowledge and terminology, what is, the first step that somebody might take to, begin this process of implementing AI security? And both of you could answer, whoever.
I was gonna say I'm happy to take first pass here. I think really from the perspective of I would read the NIST AI risk management framework first. It's at a level where I think I I don't care if you read it firsthand. If you want to put it into ChatGPT and say summarize these points and make it relative to me and my background, do that too. I think from the perspective of an organization just trying to wrap their head around it, know that most people first said, hey, who are the people represented in that list that we think should be at the table? And then we're going to look at these main principles that are coming through the NIST AI risk management framework. And I think if you have people within your organization that are also interested in how are we responsibly adopting these technologies and securely adopting them, I would say go about that first and just have the conversation, open it up, and you'll start to see like the champions are going to be cross-functional with you, even though security is owned by one group. That's definitely something that I'd just say this is probably somewhere where you want to, one, read that. It's a good introduction, and also from the perspective of who can we involve to share in finding this answer together.
Amazing. Katie, anything you wanted to add?
think I would say that we take a lot of the tools that we use for granted sometimes. And so one of the things I would do, I love Kristy's answer, by the way, is, once I did that, I think I would take a step back and truly look across my organization to understand where are the tools that I'm using, where are they using AI, right? And start and that then you can start to put these two things together. Even the biggest organizations have a challenge around creating their AI inventories. So don't be freaked out if your first response is like, I don't know the answer to that, right? That's one of the first things that you need to unravel is where is this playing a part in my business? Then if you have, like Kristy said, a view of what those risks are, you can start to put the puzzle together in a way that is applicable to your organization and your size and scale and what your business priorities are.
Amazing. Katie, Kristy, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for such an incredible overview and just, setting the scene for entrepreneurs to begin to implement processes and systems around AI security that will, fulfill their needs and decrease risk as they continue to grow. So thank you both for coming. And on behalf of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center, we are just so grateful for both of you joining us, and so incredibly grateful for our ongoing partnership with KPMG.
Thank you so much for having us. We greatly appreciated the opportunity, and hopefully it was useful to the group here today.
Yeah, thank you
Amazing.
so much.
Awesome.
Thanks all.
And to our audience, we would love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can view using the links that are going to be posted in the chat. We also shared some links to connect with Katie and Kristy, so definitely check those out as well if you want to continue learning more. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.